No matter how you slice it, being priced out of something sucks. You still want it, but your wallet says, get me the heck out of here. I mean, not being able to afford things you don't want isn't nearly as hard to cope with. You think the high prices of collectible Pez dispensers keeps me up at night? But perhaps the high prices of video games do keep you up at night. That is, up into the late hours, trying to find a deal on that one expensive game you want that just doesn't exist. But who's got time for sleep when a deal on Bucky O'Hare could pop up any second? Being priced out of video games doesn't necessarily mean you don't have much money either. I think an important distinction needs to be made between how much you could spend with how much you're willing to spend. Call it a coincidence, but back when I purchased Wild Guns, I suddenly realized that I loved eating rice 3 meals a day. And for dessert, well, you make do with what you have. But regardless of your personal situation, most people have a limit in mind for how much they're willing to spend on a game. And when a game's price goes over that limit, then there you go, you've been priced out. But what if you're just being really stingy with the prices you're willing to pay? Every now and then, I hear people say something like, if a game costs more than $10, I'm not buying it. In which case, I hope you enjoy games like the Microsoft Puzzle Entertainment Pack. Oh wait, nope. Really? You've been priced out of this one too. In which case, since I have it, who's impressed? When you were a kid, did your parents ever tell you they wouldn't buy something for you because they couldn't afford it, even though it was actually because they just didn't want to? I remember my dad telling me $5 for cotton candy was a ripoff. I never did get that cotton candy. In any case, when people say that they've been priced out of game collecting, oftentimes it's not because they're super stingy about how much money they're willing to spend, and more likely they've already had their limits pushed in terms of how much they'll spend. For most collectors, it's established that spending a certain amount of money to collect video games is worth it. Money is good, but games are better. So, because people want to collect games, some of which they may really want, this may cause them to adjust their standards of what they're willing to pay. Up until a certain point at least, call it a breaking point of sorts. I'll never forget the day I looked up the price of Little Samson. Thing is, not everybody has the same breaking point, and some people are willing to keep going higher and higher in terms of what it costs to acquire certain games. And for some people, there seemingly is no limit. I mean, if collecting video games is somebody's favorite thing, then you can see how this could happen. For the people willing to spend whatever it takes to get a certain game or games, I always get a mental image of them just laughing their heads off as they observe the price going up. Like, yeah, you're not gonna price me out. When in reality, I'm sure it hurts them to see the price go up before they've bought it. What's kind of interesting and terrifying to think about is that if nobody had a breaking point, then prices would go even higher. This is why my advice when buying games is to try to always, at the very least, buy a game for even just a few bucks less than its market price. That way, even if it's just by a few dollars, you're not contributing to the price trending upwards. Naturally, not everybody is going to do that, and you can't tell other people how to spend their money. If somebody really wants something and it's worth it to them to buy for a high price, then yeah, they're going to. And of course, this is how prices go up. Something I've seen said about collectors before in either kinder or less kind words is, you're all a bunch of idiots. You complain about the prices going up, but you're the reason why they're going up. The market responds directly to your behavior. To which I would say you gotta remember that the game collecting community is comprised of a bunch of different individuals who come from all different walks of life and with very different mindsets when it comes to collecting. It would be like calling the entirety of humankind silly when people were hoarding toilet paper, when there were still lots of people who didn't feel the need to place such an emphasis on wiping their butts. And while sure, game collectors pretty much all have in common a willingness to spend money on collecting games, how much they're willing to spend and on which games differs, and it can differ to drastically varying degrees. Of course, not only do collectors vary drastically, but so do the games themselves. When somebody says they've been priced out of collecting, obviously they haven't been priced out of every single game in existence. I mean, Super Black Bass has its glass slippers on and is ready to go to the ball, folks. So when somebody says they've been priced out, what they really mean is that they've been priced out of the games they want. And yep, I've done the research. Wanting the games you want makes sense. Although I have seen some people go the route of, well, if I can't afford the games I want, then I'll just buy the games I don't want. How can you lose? The thing is, collecting video games has been a pretty widespread activity for quite a number of years at this point. So while more and more people get into it every year, a lot of collectors have been at it for a while. And the longer somebody's been collecting, the greater the chances are of getting priced out, since you've probably already purchased a lot of the cheaper games you want already, leaving the more expensive ones left over. Trying to look on the bright side, at least you don't have to spend money on the games you already have, although my copy of Rocket Knight does require me to take it out to dinner every Friday evening. But hey, I always just eat both our entrees anyways. But yeah, those expensive games on your games wanted list. Most of you know what I'm talking about. Your mindset can go from, well, maybe one day I'll own it, to, well, nope. I had a dream I owned Little Samson one time. That was pretty good. And while people can find themselves priced out of certain games, this can also go for certain consoles too. That's right, the consoles themselves, essentially serving as an entrance fee to start collecting for that console's library. Anybody know somebody who collects the games for a console but doesn't own the console? Actually, now that I think about it, I don't have anything to play my PS4 games on right now. Nice going, discless PS5. For some people, the price of buying a console combined with the prices of the games they'd want for it might make them feel like they've been priced out of collecting for it altogether. I think a big reason why a lot of people don't collect for consoles like, let's say, the Atari Jaguar could just be that it's expensive, more so than because they think it sucks, although it could certainly be both reasons for some people too. Something else that can be hard for people to cope with is when they are very aware of how cheap certain games used to be compared to what they cost now. For example, the price of Echo the Dolphin has remained modest and humble, whereas something like Paper Mario has gotten awfully cocky in its later years, demanding a much higher price. In these instances, it can almost be easier to cope with a game having a higher price if you just came into the hobby and only ever knew it as an expensive game. For example, Symphony of the Night is still a $30 game in my brain because that's how much it used to cost, and it cost that much for a really long time. So if for some reason I hadn't gotten the game back when I did, it would feel absolutely brutal to pay the prices it goes for now. To me. And no, I'm not somebody who goes to the store expecting to pay 50 cents for a candy bar. If somebody was just coming into the retro gaming hobby more recently, they might look at it like, oh, the Castlevania game that many people consider the best in the series and was sort of overlooked back in the day? Makes sense to me it would be expensive. But even besides specific games, some people may just remember how, in general, older video games were a lot cheaper. Whether you were finding them in thrift shops, lying around in people's garage sales, or purchased online. Not that it's 100% impossible to find them for cheap that way now. I remember back in 2010, in a lot of circles, the idea of any older video game selling for over $100 was considered insane. Whereas nowadays, there are countless examples of games that go for over $100, and it's games I never thought would have gotten there. What can be said? People realize this stuff is good and still fun to play. But I think what can make people feel like they've been priced out of game collecting is that indeed so many different games have gone up in price. I mean, if it were just one or two games, you might be able to talk yourself into biting the bullet a couple times to have everything you want. But when people feel like every time they turn around they're getting slapped in the face with another high price as every other game they want is expensive, that's when you get the hands up. That's it, I'm priced out. The other thing is that the more and more prices go up, the more and more reasons we're being given to not pay them, besides, liking money and having it. But as time has gone on, the ways in which we can play these games have continued to increase, both from the gaming industry itself, with things such as re-releases, compilations, mini consoles, and whatnot, as well as from the gaming community. In fact, I'd say the gaming community has done more than the gaming industry has to make these older video games more widely accessible and playable, whether it be EverDrives, Raspberry Pis, optical disc emulators, or what have you, leading many people to just say to heck with it, I'm not going to collect it all, and just use these other methods to play games. And yet, many people do still enjoy continuing to collect, whether the goal is to play the games or not, even if it does come at a cost. And perhaps some of us have just been doing it so long at this point that we can't quit the habit. You mean there's a life that exists where the first thing I do in the morning is not checking the prices on Billy Hatcher? Forget it. But who knows, maybe less people will want to collect these games at some point in the future and prices will come back down again. I mean, as much as I'd like the younger generations to care about these older games and care about collecting them, just playing them and caring about them in general would suffice. As far as suggestions go for coping with high prices, it's been said before and may not be the most fun advice, but we can always just, not buy as many games, and of course, appreciate what we already have. In fact, for this video's question, I'd like to ask what you do to enjoy the hobby despite the high prices. After all, there's a lot more to retro gaming than just buying more games. Maybe finding new ways to organize and display your games, picking a fight with your backlog. I'd be curious what you have to say. So with that, leave your response down below along with anything else you might like to say, and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the retro bird, yeah, and he's talking about video games. He's